I lived in a scrappy part of the area, but I never had a job other than helping my mom, so I was pretty naive and gullible at the time. I graduated high school and was looking for a job. I worked with my mom my junior and senior year cleaning houses, but I wanted to work somewhere else and gain outside experience. When I graduated high school, my mom and I decided it was time to look for another job because I needed money for college. My mom loved to read newspapers, and we got a Spanish newspaper every week. Every now and then, I would skim through it to read the comics or see the job ads at the end. One night, I was so determined to find an ad that paid well and was something different that would give me another set of work skills. I was browsing the classified section at the back of the paper when I found a job that I thought was perfect for me. I don't remember word for word, but it was something like looking for young women between the ages of 18 and 25 for an open posting in this location. Now the place they marked was about 0.3 miles from where I was staying or something, so again, I thought it was perfect. I could walk there and back without worrying about traffic because we only had one car. There was also a plan to take massage training, and the pay was very good. And they say our girls make $500 to $900 a week. And I thought, wow, what a great salary. I can pay for my college in no time. I was so excited that I fit the profile that I showed my mom the job ad. My mom wasn't as excited as I was and told me it looked a little suspicious, that I should call first to see if there really is another person on the other side. So I called and a woman answered. I asked about the free training. How much do you really earn and where exactly? She seemed very nice on the phone and told me before we moved forward that they were interviewing and already had other candidates on their list. She said I could come in for an interview to see if I would make it to the second round of interviews, and I agreed. She gave me the address and I looked it up, and when I saw it was only 0.3 miles from my apartment, I was so happy. So I told my mom that I was going to go for an interview at a certain time at this place and alone. She told me that there was no way I was going alone and she was going with me. I was very angry because I wanted to do it myself without her help, because in my little mind I thought I was a grown-up and didn't need her help. But the day came and she gave us a ride in the only car we had. The address the lady gave me was strange because it took us to a motel behind a shopping plaza that was next to our apartment, and it made no sense to me why they would be interviewing there. So we just circled the square looking for a seat, and my mom got frustrated and told me just call the lady for exact location. So I did, and she told me that they were in a motel room, so-and-so room, and that they were there because it was a precaution. I thought that made sense, so I told her that I still couldn't find the place, so if she could talk to my mother and tell her exactly where the place was. And then she said, "Are you with your mother?" This time her voice went from sweet to almost angry and panicked. I said yes, and I'm with her now because she's giving me a ride, so I handed the phone to my mom, and she said hello 3 times or so, but the woman just hung up on her. So I called 2 more times, but she just didn't pick up. I was mad at the house that she just hung up like that, and so we just went home. I never put 2 and 2 together until about 3 years later, when I heard about it on the news. It was a newspaper job ad that was busted, and people were accused of human trafficking. The ad was very similar to one I read years ago, and I thanked my mom over and over, because if it wasn't for her that day, I might be dead or trafficked multiple times. I really don't know where I would end up. I'm so grateful to my mom, even though I was so mad at her for going with me that day, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be where I am today. That's for sure. My husband and I met in college. I won't name names for privacy, but we went to one of the oldest colleges in the region, over 200 years old, and it was known to be very haunted. We started dating in freshman year and started living together almost immediately. I commuted, so I stayed in his dorm a lot. And during our junior year, my husband, who was Jay's boyfriend at the time, got an apartment where he could have a bedroom to himself in a larger suite with only 2 boyfriend suite mates. It was a perfect situation for us because it meant I could live with him during the school year since we didn't have anyone sharing a bedroom with him. This living situation has obviously been incredibly beneficial to me and my loved ones. Aside from having to share an XL twin bed with a 6'2", 250-pound quarterback, it was pretty cool, but it didn't take me long to figure out just how haunted this building was. I have tons of stories about my experiences in the building and on campus in general, but it would be too long to explain them all in one video. But I will discuss a few of them to give a little context. So Jay was the RA and had to do a lot of work to get the rooms ready for all the other students who would be moving in soon. And thanks to this, he was actually able to move about a week before everyone else. As we moved Jay's things into the building that day, I saw a tall black figure in the shadows several times. I always caught it out of the corner of my eye, and it just quickly disappeared from view every time I did a double take or tried to get a closer look. I saw this number probably 4 or 5 times during the day's move, and didn't think much of it until I remembered that the building is mostly empty, except for JNB. Other experiences also included hearing voices, hearing scratching, banging at times that couldn't be explained. A very eerie night alone on campus during the holiday break when a severe storm hit and the power went out. More. We had a lot of creepy experiences, but my least favorite part of living in that building was honestly feeling like I was alone there. If I was ever alone in any part of the room, I would immediately feel a presence in the space I was in. It felt intense, loud, and really scary. The best way I can explain it is it felt like someone was standing next to me and yelling in my face, but there was no sound. We lived with this strange presence the entire time we were in this building, and to be honest, we had a good few months. But then something strange started to happen. Jay would start waking up in the middle of the night speaking another language. I know that saying speaking in tongues sounds funny, but I honestly don't know how else to describe it. I swear he sounded like he was speaking a completely foreign language, but it was a language I couldn't identify and had never heard before. He always sounded very intense and had an almost aggressive tone to his garbled words or whatever he was saying. But anyway, he woke me up with these conversations in my sleep every night for months. It really scared me, but I never said anything about it until one night it scared me so badly that I honestly had no choice. So one night I woke up to find Jay on top of me. Remember, we had an ex-twin, Albert, and he's a big guy. I lay on my back and he straddled me, placing his hands on the bed on either side of my head. His eyes were wide open. He bent down and seemed to be looking into my face. I was immediately freaked out, but just played it off by saying something like, "Hey baby, are you okay? Is everything okay?" There was no answer, and Jay just continued to stare right through me and didn't even move, didn't even blink. I kept this up for a minute or two, thinking he was potentially just acting stupid or passed out from sleep and couldn't form words. We stayed that way for what seemed like forever, but it was really 3 or 4 minutes maybe. He then got off me, crawled over to me to get off the bed, and stood still in the room for a few seconds. After that, he turned sharply to look at the desk and chair in the bedroom. He pulled the chair off the table, turned it 180 degrees so it was facing him, walked around the chair 3 times in a circle, and then stood directly facing the chair. He stood for about a minute, looking at the seat of the chair, and then came back to my bed and immediately fell asleep. The whole time this was happening, I just stared with my mouth wide open. I know I tried to call him and get his attention a few times to see what he was doing, but at a certain point, all I could do was just watch him in amazement. It was definitely the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I told Jay all about what he had done the next morning, and he was very upset as it had really scared me. Nor has he ever been a sleepwalker or sleepwalker. However, shortly after this event, I decided to clean the place with the help of a friend. We did, and after that, things really quieted down. Jay continued to talk in his sleep occasionally for the rest of that school year, and even here and there during the next school year. We've been married and living our own way since we graduated, almost 2 years, and I haven't heard Jay talk in his sleep, or seen him walk since we left college town. Deep down, I know this building was haunted, and I truly believe that whatever it was attached to Jay for some reason, and was trying to speak through him or something. Anyway, thanks for listening, and sorry it's so long. I've tried to condense it as much as possible to make it easy to listen to, but if anyone has any ideas as to what was going on in that building, I'd love to hear from. I want to start by saying that I am a stay-at-home mom, a very stay-at-home single mom, whose family is so far away that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to worry. Tonight, I put my oldest child to bed, and as I went about my new nightly ritual of feeding the neighbor's cat, my husband joked about wanting corn dogs from 7-Eleven. I don't get out much and don't mind, so I said we need milk anyway, and just left. The neighbors were uneventful, except for one damn cat getting a nail on my middle finger when I was giving her treats. Because of this too, I left earlier than usual and headed straight to the store. It's a little after 9 p.m. and I pull up to the 7-Eleven down the road, parked next to the building. The unobstructed windows run the length of the building. It is well lit. I immediately notice a man in blue standing on the sidewalk. I don't pay attention, but I start gathering my things. My finger still hurts a lot, so I'm in no rush to curse this lovely cat when I hear a man mumbling something. My window is partially open, but the windshield is already fogged up, and when I look up, I see him walking toward my passenger. He tries to open my door, but thank God my kids broke the door handle and it won't open. I immediately get out of the car, and as I stand in the open door, I look through the windshield. I say, I'm sorry, what are you doing? And he starts saying over and over, "Are you a yellow taxi? Are you a yellow taxi?" I say again, "I don't know you, I won't let you in my car." He realizes he can't get in and people are watching, so he starts walking away from my car and I run inside. I'll admit I'm a little shocked, but I'm trying to chalk it up to the wrong person. But we live in a small town and our taxis are just random cars. So I'm walking and trying to make sure he's not near my car, and at one point I see he looks like he's leaving. I call my husband and tell him a little about what happened, only to hear him say it's probably nothing. But with corn dogs in hand, I get out and head to my car. The vision of this guy in my back seat flashes in my head. I see him walking away from my car, but now he has a backpack. Something flashes on the side of the pack, and I realize I didn't close the door when I ran inside. And this shit-loving mother has my 5-year-old son's backpack. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I walked maybe 2 feet away from my car and yelled that it was my son's backpack. I thought he might run, but he actually came to me. I say again that this is my son's backpack, and he starts saying again, "Are you a yellow cap?" I scream louder, "This is my son's backpack. Give it back to me." For a millisecond, I even consider that it might not be my son's backpack and panic. But at that moment, I'm convinced I see a bus passing by. This man is still talking about the yellow cab, and I looked at him. Angry Mama Bear got angry. I take a long look at what he was wearing, and it was hospital blue pajama pants and a deep but bright blue hoodie with a Watt logo and an O with some hemispheric lines of something on it. It all happens in a matter of seconds, and I just remember looking at him furiously and telling him that he was convicted of stealing a small child's backpack and to get out of here. Maybe it's because I live in Canada, or maybe it's because I didn't go out of sight, but he started to leave. I immediately went inside and told the clerks, but I didn't think any of us knew what to do. For a second, I was going to call the police, but in the end, it was just a backpack. But I just couldn't stop thinking about him trying to get in the car with me. So in the end, I called the police. I started to tell what was going on, and then I saw the guy again. I followed him on the phone and parked far in front of him. Time flies when you're on the phone with the police and a guy walks by my car. He turns back and sees it's me and turns around. I didn't turn the car off, so I panic, but I switch to the steering wheel and start driving. Although this man was not scared, he actually walked to my car, and as I was driving away, I told the officer, "What the hell is he thinking? It's so dangerous. I have given you its description and general location. I have to go home. We ended up talking on the way. I gave them my info and the guys too. I really can't tell you why I followed him either. I mean, I follow a lot of true crime, and I guess I just couldn't help but report the person who tried to get into my car, right? I also told the police the same thing, and we talked on the phone, and I went inside. Now, my husband is good at pointing out people's difficulties, and it is clear that this man has had mental health issues, and I also suspect that he has some kind of addiction. He was quite thin with large scabs on his face. It kind of blunted how I felt about it, and I think that's why I wanted to share it. What happened really scared me, and I don't know why I did what I did. Maybe it was stupid, I don't know. It all seemed silly, I guess. I went up to the guy and followed him, and I know I'm ridiculously slow sometimes, but I got the backpack back, but it was stupid, I know. Anyway, I got a call 5 minutes before I started writing this, and the cops got him. He goes to spend the night at the station because he's in a state of strong alcoholic intoxication. According to the officer, we stopped with our headlights on, and he asked if we were a yellow cat. Part of me feels like maybe he was just drunk or something, but part of me also thinks this guy used that as an excuse for why he would think to get into my car like that. I really had an adrenaline rush, and I was just really tired, but if you made it this far, thanks for listening, and man, what an amazing night. All this happened in 2007. I was 9 years old, and my friend Hannah was 8. Now, every summer, her parents take us camping about 3 hours from home in northern Ontario, Canada. This campsite was in the Borewash area. You can Google the prison for more information. But in any case, the camp consisted of several cottages or wagons located in a large park on the shores of a large lake. Every summer, we were greeted by our friends we had made over the years, and we had a great time. However, this year was different because we met a girl named Emily. She was our age, but shy. She never ate or stayed out too late. We always assumed her parents were just strict. We spent the night, took pictures together, and she became, as it were, the third in our group of 3 musketeers. One day we actually swam. There was a floating dock with a slide, and we decided to each take turns going down to make bigger splashes. It was my turn, and for some reason, I was swept under the dock. And as I tried to maneuver out from under it, Emily kept holding me under the dock. She wouldn't let me go, and finally Hannah grabbed me and pulled me up. We both got out of the water and ran to the camp, and were very much afraid that our friend would try to drown what I saw. The next day was the last day we were in camp. Emily walked over and acted like nothing had happened. She spent the whole day persuading us to walk along the river to the huge building. She said it was only a few hours away, but we could spend our last day there and we would have a lot of fun. We both sensed something was wrong and decided it was best not to go. Nothing happened after that, and we just went home, and Emily was gone for the next year. A few years ago, when we were looking at our camp photos for my 18th birthday party, when we got to the 2007 photos, we noticed that Emily was missing. Interestingly, we asked Hannah's mom, who told us she always thought of Emily as our imaginary friend, that she had never seen Emily. In the photos we have, you can see that in most of our photos we have left room for Emily between us and Hannah. We decided, without speaking to each other, to write down the characteristics of Emily that would define her, and surprisingly we recorded the same thing. Green eyes, shoulder-length brown hair, very light skin tone, and very thin. But what confuses me the most is that I remember being trapped under that dock, and I remember how she kept me there. But if it wasn't real, then what kept me under the bench? There was no way we were both imagining the same girl, the same name, the same experience, and the same description of her. We also remember how she tried to get us to follow the river, and we realized that the river actually went to prison. When we also started reading about the prison, we realized that apparently there were a lot of meetings with people there. To be clear, I don't believe in the paranormal per se, but this honestly just blew my mind. I have no idea why we both saw Emily, and why she tried to drown me or why she wanted to lure us to prison, but it goes without saying that we did visit that prison in the middle of the night, and that's a whole other story in its own way that maybe someday I will write, but I still can't explain what Emily was and how we saw her, the same little girl, and why she wanted me drowned and why she wanted us in prison. But I'm wondering if any of you have had a similar experience. That was 5 years ago, and I still get goosebumps to this day. So I was with my friend on my way to a friend's house to catch a UFC fight. We stopped at a convenience store for a case of beer and missed a turn on the way to my friend's house. Luckily, all the streets in the area are connected, so instead of turning around, I just told my buddy just catch the next turn and make a full circle so we can turn around like that. The streets are pretty narrow, so it's a residential area, and we drive a pickup with 24-inch rims. Meanwhile, he starts to slow down, and I'm looking at the scratch to see if I won, when my buddy goes, "Hey, look, someone's husky just sitting in the middle of the road." I look up and say, "No, it's too big to be a husky." So I told him to switch to high beam, and once he did, whatever it was, I didn't like it. So like I said, my friend's truck is sitting on big wheels, and this thing still looks huge. It was less than 10 feet away from us. When the light hit it, it turned its head. And when I say we saw a human face on the thing, I mean we could make out the eyes, the nose, the mouth, everything. Then he literally spread those big wings and flew away. No noise from the wings or anything. We literally had to pull over on the side of the road just to appreciate what the heck we had just seen. We went to my friend and told them what we had just seen, but they did not take us seriously, and we still don't know what we saw that night. I was 12 years old when it happened. It was the summer of 1984, and I was out of school for the season, and my mom had to go out that day. She told me she would be back in about half an hour, and then left. And after a few minutes, I realized I needed to go to the bathroom. I went to the regular upstairs bathroom, but at that moment I realized I had left my Archie comic in the upstairs bathroom. I really didn't like the basement, and I really didn't like the downstairs bathroom, but sometimes I had to use it when someone was in the other one. I decided I would just run downstairs to grab my comic book and head upstairs to do my business. So I ran downstairs. By the time I got to the bathroom, I realized I needed to go so urgently that I didn't have time to climb the stairs. So I sat in the bathroom, locked the door, and did my best. Now this bathroom was tiny, and when I mean tiny, I mean very tiny. When I sat on the toilet, for example, the corner of the sink sat just above my left knee, and if I reach out in front of me, I can touch the other side of the room where the shower curtain was. There was a door directly to my right, and I could easily touch the door handle and the lock above the handle. The lock consisted of nothing more than a hook and eye, and would not hold up if someone pulled hard on it, as it would just snap out of the wall. But it was enough that if someone tried to open the door, there would be reasonable resistance, and then they realized the bathroom was already in use. Simple enough, and generally adequate for what I suppose it was needed for. But anyway, when I went into the bathroom, even though no one was home, I closed the door and put the metal hook in my ear, and thought nothing of it. I was quickly lost in the world of Archie Andrews and the gang of characters who went to Riverdale High until I heard a commotion above me. I knew no one was home, but maybe someone came home while I was downstairs. I stopped reading and listened intently when I heard the first heavy footsteps on the basement stairs. It was also unusually loud, and sounded like whoever owned it was really big and very heavy. I knew how many stairs there were, so as the heavy stomping down the stairs approached slowly and deliberately, I counted 1, 2, 8, 9, 14, 16. I thought I was scared when he reached the third stair, but when he got to the 10th, I actually heard it, and it just took my breath away. When it came down, a sound like rushing air and laughter came down the stairs and down the hall through the bathroom door, and it sent shivers down my spine. I could hear him around the corner as he walked to the bottom of the stairs and down the hall toward me. In a panic, I dropped Archie's book on the floor, and I grabbed the doorknob when I realized she was now behind the bathroom door. I heard this noise of the wind and this laughter, all mixed together like many voices saying some names or something. I struggled to hold onto the doorknob as it began to twist in my hands as whatever was behind the door tried to sneak into the bathroom with me. The door trembled with a strong tug from the other side, threatening to tear the door off its hinges. I thought wryly for a moment that it was a good thing I was sitting on the toilet just then, because otherwise whatever was going down the toilet so freely would surely have flowed down my legs. Time seemed to stretch further and further as the struggle continued. I fought whatever was on the other side of the door to take over the door mob, but I really don't know how long that lasted. It might have only been a few seconds, or maybe even minutes. But no matter how long, tears streamed down my cheeks, and I kept screaming in terror. And then, at some point, he stopped. And I was alone in the bathroom, still screaming in terror about nothing. The noise was gone, the tugging and tugging of the door was over, and there was just nothing. I sat shaking violently for what seemed like an eternity, not daring to let go of the doorknob so that the beast I was fighting was still on the other side of the door, silently waiting for them to let go and breathe a sigh of relief, only to pounce and tear the door down, with loops. In fact, I didn't even relax a single muscle until I heard my mom's footsteps above me and heard her calling me. I yelled to her that I was downstairs and for her to come down and help me. A few moments later, Mom rushed downstairs and asked if I had been in the bathroom. I said yes, I'd be out in a minute, cleaned up quickly, and hesitantly opened the door, hoping it was really my sweet mom and not some horrible trick. But it was really my mom, and I threw myself into her arms, sobbing and trying to tell her what had just happened. She looked at me skeptically and said, "What's your blood sugar level?" I said, "What?" And she asked again, "What is your blood sugar level? When was the last time you checked it?" Just 2 years prior, I had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and although I have taken great care of myself on my own, I still need, having had my parents' help from time to time. She obviously thought this was one of those times. I realized that she didn't believe me again, instead thinking that it must be my over-imagining and that maybe it was also due to low blood sugar or something. So I went upstairs and took her blood sugar, and I don't really remember what it was, but it was definitely fine. But I was left with the sadness that my mom didn't believe me, and it wasn't the first time strange things had happened, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But many years later, as things turned out, she would eventually believe me. I know this story is going to sound silly, but I can assure you that it really happened to me and my cousin in the summer of 2018. My cousin and I live pretty close to each other in the suburbs of Detroit. We both love photography and long drives listening to music, so that's what we did that day. We drove about an hour to a small town and found an abandoned barn that was no longer for sale. We didn't really notice any warnings at the time, so we decided to be adventurous and go check it out. But boy, was that a big mistake. The barn was in semi-decent condition, though the paint was starting to peel. Structurally, it was pretty solid, so I didn't feel awkward going inside. I'm an avid urban explorer in Detroit and have been in far worse buildings up to this point. Once inside, we somehow ended up in the basement of this barn. And man, I immediately felt some weird ass here. Little girls' clothes, toys, and furniture were strewn across the basement of this shed, and I thought it was creepy, as did my cousin. Before continuing, though, there was a pretty decent-sized cornfield behind the barn. This cornfield backed right into the barn, so we decided to be quirky and take some photos in the cornstalks. I fired a few shots at my cousin, and we decided it was time to head back to the car. Walking through the first row of corn on the way back to my cousin's car, I see a vertebra in the dirt. And at this point, I pause in disbelief. Like, is this really what I think it is? Or is it some kind of animal bone? I start looking around and damn, there were a few more. They were too big to be deer, and I yell to my cousin, who is almost back to the car, and ask her to look. We both start to really explore the land and find more and more bones. Now, for the record, I studied cadaver lab and human anatomy in college, so I'm pretty familiar with the human body. We found the fibula and the femur completely intact, and that's when I really started freaking out. We decided to call the police because we knew it was serious at this stage. We waited in the car for a good 15 minutes, completely freaking out, until the police arrived. As soon as the cops arrived, there were 2 of them. We all started looking for corn and a pile of garbage nearby. I think the cops didn't believe us at first. I distinctly remember them saying they thought it was a deer carcass. That was until I found a complete rib cage in a pile of junk, and then they changed their tune very quickly. The cops told us they needed us to leave and that they were calling in a full forensics team to start gathering evidence and whatnot. We were totally shocked, and on the way out I finally saw the no sign, and I'm sure the cops did too, but they didn't care at that point. We gave our information to the police but never heard back. I also watched the news closely for the next few weeks and saw nothing. But it's definitely one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. So I was listening to a story here that reminded me of my experience. I'm 21 now, but I was about 13 when it happened. So first I want to say that I know this sounds really fake, but the whole thing was just amazing to me. My girlfriend and I, both girls, slept in a tent in the paddock and just talked about school, sports, etc. It was quite late, but we were so excited to even be allowed into the tent that we stayed awake. I decided I wanted to scare her, so I pretended to hear breathing outside. I acted really scared and said something to the effect of, "My God, can you hear that?" Someone behind the tent. She became extremely quiet, as if trying to listen, and her face seemed to fall. Mind you, I was totally kidding until I heard the gasp. I thought I was making it up in my head because it was too weird of a coincidence to joke about it for it to actually happen. I look at her and she mouths, "I hear it," and we both freeze and sit looking at each other, not knowing what to do. Breathing was quite heavy, which made it 10 times scarier. I literally start circling the tent, and we hear footsteps that sound like they are trying to quiet down. We sat in complete fear for about 2 minutes. Breathing seems to stop and footsteps rush out of the back of the tent. Then we see a faint blue and red light coming towards her driveway. Her father was a policeman, so we thought it was him, although I don't know why he has lights on. But we were 13 each, so we weren't the smartest. Anyway, we both took this as an opportunity to run across the corral to the driveway, which was about 600 meters away. And we come to the policeman who was not her father. Her father then comes out of the house in confusion, as there is a policeman and 2 girls who were supposed to be sleeping with their faces down. Then we found out it was an unstable guy who stole a car in their neighborhood and ran through people's yards trying to hide. What confused me the most was that I tried to scare her with some stupid lie, and then it actually happened. My family and I moved into a new 2x4 house. It used to have an attic, but it was covered over. After a few months of living in this house, I sometimes just watch TV and hear scratching from the roof. I just identify it as a bird, as they are common where we live. After 3 weeks, the scratches intensified, but became more frequent. It looked like he was trying to climb off the roof. By the way, the entrance to the attic is above my sister's room. One day, my sister tells my father that the seal is open. My father is confused because it should have been sealed. My dad goes to close it and realizes that it's actually really hard to open and close, so whatever opened had to be pretty strong. And that was the moment I started to be skeptical. That same night, I go to get snacks from the fridge and open it to find they are gone. I thought my siblings must have eaten it. And since morning, my parents are gathering about the missing cake, because that cake was supposed to be for my niece's birthday. They asked if I had anything to do with it, and I, like my siblings, said no. However, I became very suspicious of the attic, so I plucked up the courage to go and check it out. Also note that I'm probably the most paranoid person in the world. So I was scared for my life, but my curiosity got the better of me. Just in case, I take out a ladder, a torch, and a knife. I open the initial thing every time it is summoned. I am ashamed to go there to see nothing. But when I look for more, I see cake, empty snack bags, dirty clothes, and a low, dark silhouette. He just freezes in place. Immediately, I rush and scream to my parents and tell them everything. They told me to stay in my room and went up and checked. But when they did, whoever was there was gone. I'm still very shaken up from that moment and still have nightmares from time to time. We have since moved out of that house and now live a normal, non-scary life, but it is certainly something I will never forget. This happened yesterday, and I still can't believe it happened. I'm still very scared, and I'll explain it all at the end, so sorry if it's a bit confusing as I go on. I recently moved into a new apartment 3 weeks ago, and I share it with my sister. The only person we know well is a single mother who lives in the apartment next to us. Since we moved in, she has been giving us advice and helping us with various things. We don't know anyone properly yet. However, from what we have seen of our neighbors, they are mostly couples in their 30s and 40s or older guys who live alone. We are probably the youngest here. We are both women. I'm 18 and my sister is only 60. So today I was out with friends, and then I went to the gym. After that, I followed my sister so we could go eat, and we arrived around 10 p.m., I think. However, my sister and I got into our pajamas and were just sitting there watching TV when the buzzer rang. I jumped up to answer, and it turned out to be our neighbor, a single mother. I asked her what happened, and she said our father asked us downstairs. My stomach immediately dropped, and I immediately asked her if she was sure he said he was our dad. The reason I asked her was to make sure she really said it. But she replied that yes, he said that he is our father, and he is asking for us. My neighbor asked me if she could let him into our apartment, but I told her not to. I wanted to tell my sister, but I didn't want to worry her right away, so I asked my neighbor not to approach anyone, and I heard her repeat it to him. I didn't hear anything for a few minutes after that, and I started to get really worried. At that moment, my sister comes up to me and asks who it is. I start to feel really anxious and call out to my neighbor a few times. It must have only been about 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity when she didn't answer. I was about to tell my sister to call the police, but in the end, she told me he wasn't there. Then she came to our apartment and explained what happened. She said that she went to her apartment after finishing work and saw a man near the horns. At first she assumed it was just someone who lived there, until he noticed her approach and asked us by name and if she could let him into our apartment. She asked him who he was, and he told her that he was our father. Obviously, she called us later and told us first because our neighbor doesn't know us that well. So she doesn't know what our dad looks like. She said that because you are young, she did not want a stranger to come to our apartment. She said her motherly instinct kicked in when she heard my hesitation. Let him into the apartment. Apparently, after he heard me say that, he got very pushy with her and started trying to move her out of the way. He kept telling her, "It's okay, I'm their dad, let me go, I won't do anything." She started arguing with him and asked him to give his name, but he refused to tell her. She told him that if I didn't feel comfortable letting him in, then he wasn't in. His reaction was to call her a bitch and then get in his car and drive away. Now this is the reason why I hesitated in the first place. So we haven't spoken to our father since I was 16 years old. At one point we even considered getting a restraining order from him. He is not our biological father, but we were legally adopted by him when I was 9 years old. He physically and verbally abused our mom and actually started doing the same to me. It got to the point where we had to leave in the middle of the night, and after that he became very controlling and secretly followed us and recorded me and my sister. He also has a criminal record, and I believe he was convicted of manslaughter in the 80 ES. I have no idea about the backstory of this, and I honestly don't want to know, but like I said, we haven't heard from him since, so as soon as she said the word dad, I almost had a panic attack. I asked her to describe it, and she said that because it was dark, she couldn't see it. And in the end we stayed with her, because me and my sister were really shocked. I don't know whether to call the police or not, and I'm really confused. I don't know if it's our dad or not because it could easily be someone else. But I would appreciate some advice. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. So me and my friend were walking to the park just to play, and we discovered this sewer system. We decided to check because we were stupid. She was covered by a grate, but the bars were so bent that she and I could squeeze in. She had a very bad feeling. She is very intuitive when it comes to the paranormal, but I just ignored it and moved on. Now there was a large room with a grate leading into it, and above it was a grate through which the light came. There was a large tunnel leading to the right, and a small tunnel higher up that I couldn't reach on the left. The room was partially filled with water below, and there was some graffiti on the walls of the tunnel. When I looked to my left, it was very dark, so I couldn't see very well, but far down there was another grate, and light was seeping through it. At this stage, I could barely make out some long, thin thing stretched out that looked like a very thin arm. I couldn't see the body attached to him because it was further away from me where it was darker, and I could only see it because it was in front of the light. So it shone behind him and made him jump. Sorry if this is weird, but I don't know how else to describe it. All you need to know is that I could see part of it, but not the other part, and it looked like an outstretched arm that didn't move. I just ignored it, thinking it might just be a wooden plank or something propped up because the room I was in had several wooden planks. I decided to stack some rocks by the left tunnel so I could reach it and look in, and when I looked through the tunnel, there was another room far beyond the tunnel that had a grate above it, like my room, and light was seeping in as well. But then I noticed this gray hunched figure with an extremely bony body. From what I could see, there were no clothes or hair on him. His body looked very malnourished. I could not see his head or legs as the tunnel was very small. All I could really see was his back, part of his neck, and the tops of his arms. He wasn't moving, and by this point I was obviously in a frenzy. I went to my friend and told her what I saw. I asked for her phone to take a picture to show her as she refused to go back there. And I took a picture. And then of course we highlighted it. Unfortunately, I no longer have the photos, because the phone they were taken on got lost at some point in my life. We went back a few times to try and get more photos, but haven't seen anything like it since. The tunnels were just empty. But after some research, I have to say that I think the shapes were either creeping or gray, or maybe something similar. If anyone has any info on graylings, please let me know as I can't find much on them. Again, sorry if this is poorly worded, but I'm not the best writer, and it's really late here. If anyone needs me to explain anything, I'd be happy to do so in the comments below. Also, If you have any idea what it was or had a similar experience, I'd love to know. Thank you for listening. I was 18, living in student dorms a few hours from home, and working as a waitress at an upscale bar and restaurant. I'm short, only 5 tall, so I'm used to people being creepy and trying to intimidate me. But as an 18-year-old girl whose father tried to protect her from the world, and she grew up in a tiny, friendly town, it never occurred to me to be afraid of people hiding in the dark. So we've had a lot of regulars, some of whom I've become close to over the years working there, and some of the frequent eyes have learned my name and general facts about me, as I'm generally quite open about myself. One such man was tall, thin, and several decades older. I think he was in his 50s. Joe. Joe was a good, kind man with a generous nature who owned a local shoe store. The second time I was his waitress, he gave me a pair of slightly worn work boots and insisted I take them. All kinds of people flocked to him because of his kindness and the way he carried himself, and one of them became the first man outside of my family that I feared. One day, Joe came with his younger brother. About the same height, slightly bulkier build and not unattractive as I recall, but his eyes just always bothered me. I fancied myself a writer in high school, but nothing in my vocabulary then or now could have helped me describe how unsettling his gaze was. It seemed almost dead, lifeless, but I guess I was just nervous. I mean, Joe was a good man. His brother was probably just less carefree and more intense or something. They dined together several times over the following weeks, but while Joe usually asked me to be the server, he asked our host to assign one of the other servers to his table after the first time. Then, one evening, Brother Joe came alone and asked me by name, and I was happy to oblige. For the first time he seemed relaxed, energetic, even charismatic. He was interesting, with wit and a story on every topic I could throw at him. I guess he just had a hard time relaxing with his brother by the end of his shift. And that might be true, but through his laughter and charisma, his eyes never seemed kind. Through it all, they remained lifeless. However, eventually it was time for me to leave, but he was still there, still waiting to be served, so my manager offered to take a table. He followed through, so I got a tip, but it was common knowledge that I had classes in the morning and probably had homework to do. So I jumped at the chance, but went to complete some closing duties and asked the man at the last table if he needed anything else. He also seemed confused as soon as I said I was going home. He seems to have hardened. His face was chiseled and reminded me of my controlling ex-stepfather, which immediately put me on edge. I saw the same thing quite often when I was a little girl before the impact, so I left immediately. I called my best friend and offered to buy him dinner if he met me at a diner between my dorm and my job. I don't know why I did it, but I just felt like I needed someone to meet me sooner rather than later. Brother Joe didn't seem dangerous in any way, except for the strain in his voice before I left. But I knew that for most of my walk, which would be poorly lit, I would be safer with a companion. So we met at the diner, ate, laughed, and went back to the hostel. A good 25 minutes of walking, but only 15 or so, the hair on the back of my neck just burned. Something really scared me, and I couldn't figure out why. I told my friend, who brushed it off until he looked behind him and screamed. I turned to see him, Brother Joe, just a few yards behind us, holding a metal bar. I don't know what they are called, but you see them on construction sites, usually for reinforcement when pouring concrete and whatnot. And he held it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Obviously this scared me and I screamed. My friend grabbed my hand and we just ordered it. And though my heart was in my throat, and I heard nothing but the blood rushing in my ears, I swear I heard his footsteps behind me. We ran to the dorm, and I told the security guard who made us wait in the office while he looked at the cameras in the parking lot and called the police. The cops showed up, but they didn't do anything because technically all he did was scare us. After they left, the security guard asked us a few more questions and commented that there was a man standing by the front door for a while before leaving. He thought he was homeless, but my blood was running in my veins. I called in sick for a few days, and when I got back to work, Joe was there. I told him what happened, and he nodded, not even doubting the validity of what I said. It turned out that his brother had served some time for stalking and even assaulting young women, and had even been sent to trial for assaulting one of them and being hospitalized. He somehow managed to avoid jail time for the assault, but Joe said it was only a matter of time before he actually killed someone. I didn't see Joe much after that, and I never saw his brother again. The owner of the restaurant was angry for a long time, blaming me for running away a regular who spent a lot of money when he came. It took me a few more meetings to make me a little more cynical, but Brother Joe, he was the one who took me out of my naivety. I came from Serbia at the age of 13 with my mother. My older brother, 15 years older than me, lived in America for several years and sent for us. My mom wouldn't stay, although I didn't know it at the time. We landed in New York, and my brother was scheduled to come and pick us up. However, my niece decided to come early, and my brother's wife went into labor shortly before we landed. Obviously, my brother couldn't leave his wife, so he asked his co-worker, a cab driver, to pick us up in New York and take us to New Jersey, where he and my sister-in-law lived. When we arrived in New York, we waited at customs for what seemed like an eternity. We looked for our brother, but we did not see him. It was the early 90s, and cell phones weren't that common. And even if they were, my mom didn't have one. So we panicked a little because we didn't see our brother or sister anymore. But suddenly we heard our name being called and saw a tall man. He introduced himself in perfect Serbian and explained that he was a good friend of my brother's, and then told us about the baby. And he said he would drive us 2 hours from the airport to my brother's house. My mom finally relaxed, and they happily started talking about the baby and my brother in America. I, however, just felt like an underdog. This guy made me feel bad, and despite my brother's friendship with him, I distrusted him. We had been driving for a good hour, if not an hour and a half, when he announced that he was going to pick us up for breakfast. We hadn't eaten for about 3 hours, so we were starving by then. We pulled up to the house, and my mom and I were really confused. He cheerfully insisted that his wife make us breakfast, and after we drove the rest of the way to the hospital to my family, Mom shut me up when I whispered something was wrong and told me we should be grateful for the hospitality, and so we were allowed in the house. It was very dark and damp and kind of dirty, and suddenly I think my mom finally got nervous and started insisting that he take us to my brother's. Suddenly the guy grabbed my mom's hand. He told her that he needed a wife to take care of him in his house, and when he heard my brother tell others at work that she was coming to stay, he knew he had found a wife. I was a little skinny kid at the time, and I tried to push him away from my mom, but he hit me so hard I just saw stars. At this point we were terrified, and none of us really spoke English. We only knew my brother's home number, and he was in the hospital. Also, you don't dial 911 in Serbia. So even if I could, I didn't know you could call the police that way. So he tells my mom she has to clean and cook for him and takes me down to the basement where I was locked in what I now know is called the laundry room. I banged and cried and screamed, but it was so far down in the basement that everything was muffled. We were kept in this for a week and kept at his house for a whole week. He would lock us in the basement after my mom made him breakfast and let us out when he got home at 4. If we had to use the restroom, there was a bathroom, but that was it. Just a bathroom in the laundry room. It was very cold down there, and even we, huddled under a blanket, did practically nothing. However, one morning I opened the small window by climbing on top of some boxes. I managed to open it, and my mom insisted that I push it through. I didn't want to leave her. And besides, how can I get help if I can't read or speak the language? But I didn't want to live like this for the rest of my life, so I did what she asked. I ran as soon as I got out, and I'm sure I was a sight. A skinny boy without shoes, wearing only shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of November. But that's what saved us, because a few caring neighbors tried to get me to come to their place, and I didn't want to. I was so terrified. I kept trying to get them to follow me. The police were called, and a very nice policeman tried to force me to get into his car. And then I saw the man who was driving us pull up in his taxi, and he saw the cops and just drove off. It was then that I ran to his house to get my mother, and of course the policeman and his partner ran after me, and my mother was saved. It took them about 4 more hours to find someone who spoke our language so we could tell them what happened. A warrant was issued for the man. My brother was contacted. His friend told him we never showed up, and my brother was frantically calling home to Serbia to find us. He drove up to pick us up and give the cops information about his supposed friend so they could find him, but they never did. Then until 911, it was easy for someone to disappear. However, it made me very distrustful of people and their intentions for a long time. Eventually, my mom also got homesick and returned to Serbia. I stayed, finished school, and became a police officer in the army, thanks to the good officer who helped me all those years ago. It happened when I was quite young. I can't pinpoint the age because it was more of a persistent phenomenon that lasted quite a while. But from about the time I was maybe 5 to 10 years old, I guess. At the time, I lived in a small community, and there was a river nearby that my group of friends used to play near, as well as several other bodies of water, mostly small streams, ponds, and the like. But we also often played in the nearby forest, I guess as children. We were groups of 8 or maybe at least 2 or 3 people. We did normal kid things and got to know the part of the forest we were playing in. I now have very vivid memories that span almost as long as I can remember. Back to when my family moved, someone is calling my name. This was especially common when I was with a smaller group of friends. Sometimes it was the voices of my parents, neighbors, or someone I didn't recognize, but it was the voices of adults, if that makes sense. For example, I heard my dad call me by my name several times, even though he was at work. Sometimes he really was in another country. My house is also out of earshot from the area where I used to play, and my mom was often preoccupied with looking after my sister or her work, and the thing is, she definitely wasn't the one calling me. I was also a very obedient child, a bit of a goody two-shoes, I guess. I usually always obeyed when adults told me to do something or come to them when they called me, and it definitely sounded like those voices were trying to lure me out of my group. My friends said they never heard voices when I asked, so I stuck with the group and continued whatever game we were playing. Usually it happened in the forest, but sometimes when we were walking near the river, and the voices just kept coming from sides that never made sense. Deeper into the forest, closer to the river, further from my house, further from my group. They never said anything but my name even when I called them. I rarely went there alone, but sometimes I felt like I was being watched, even though no one was there. Sometimes I got the urge to run away from the forest, and I never ignored it. I just dropped everything and ran. I also don't know how relevant this information is, but I do know that a young boy drowned in the river we were playing at the time this happened to me. I realize it all sounds a bit silly and just something kids do or imagine, but I saw things a lot as a kid too, mostly when I was very young. My parents said that I often came to them and told them about angels or fairies or something I encountered in the tall grass or near the forest. They sometimes heard me talking to the air, as I suppose the children. I definitely didn't have an imaginary friend, but I do have vague memories of seeing these things. Sometimes they scared me, but most of the time they didn't. The voices in the forest also did not frighten each time, but they always surprised me because I didn't know what was calling. This phenomenon stopped after my family moved, and I stopped playing in those woods, which is very strange. But recently I went back to the area for nostalgia, and I didn't hear any voices, but somehow the place gave me a bad headache, and my friend and I went back earlier than planned. There was another area that also really scared me. As kids we called it the dark side, a bit offensive I know, but we were very young, and it was a part of the forest we never went into. I also remember that as a child I always just walked around it. But anyway, what do you think of all this? Do you think something was really calling my name from the forest? Or is it all just in my head? In December of 2013, during my sophomore year of college, my then boyfriend David threw a frat party that I attended with him. It was a pleasant event that required everyone to dress up. He was in a suit, I was in a dress and heels. This is important for later, so I mention it. But we had a pretty good time and then went back to his place to drop off the award David had won and change into tacky Christmas sweaters for the party we were having that night. It was maybe 7:30, but considering it was December, it was already pretty dark when we pulled into the parking lot outside David's apartment. In its place was a single road with a parking lot on both sides. Stains against the building and stains against the fence lining the edge of the compound. We parked in a fenced area with the trunk of the car facing the building, directly opposite the stairs leading to David's door. Maybe 30 feet from safety, I would guess. However, David and I got out and went to the trunk to collect our reward when a man began to approach us. Dave spotted him and said, "What's up, dude?" The man didn't say anything and just walked towards us. As he got closer, I saw that he was wearing baggy black sweatpants and a camouflage hoodie. He was wearing a hood, and the ties were pulled tight so I could only see half of his face. However, both of his hands were in the front pocket of his hoodie. David said again, "What happened?" This time, the man replied, "Stand by the car." Confused, I said, "Wait, what?" And the man took out a gun from the pocket of his hoodie. I said, "Stand by the car." David clung to the back of the car while the man put a gun to his back. I was in total shock at what was happening, so I took a step back, trapped between two cars, a fence, and a man holding a gun to my boyfriend. He told David to give him all the money we had, but we both only used cards and never carried cash. Unfortunately, when he was home for Thanksgiving, his parents gave him $200 and a 20, all of which ended up in our mother's hands. He then turned to me, pointed the gun at my face, less than a foot away, and said, "It's your turn." I was dressed and only had a small purse. All I had on was my phone and lip gloss. I stammered that I had nothing, looking at the gun he pointed at me. He then went back to my boyfriend. At this point, I feel my blood boil. I was becoming less scared and more furious. Outraged that this man aggressively stole from two Brook College children. I mean, how dare he treat other people like that? Couldn't he tell we were coming from an event and he was going to ruin our night? I wanted so bad to kick him in the big clumsy heel. But luckily I realized that would just make him angrier. So instead I grabbed my phone with my hand in my purse and tried to dial 911. Unfortunately, my purse was too small to hide any movement, and I was worried if he would see me trying to call for help, that he would shoot. So in the end, I just stood there staring at the gun pressed into David's back. Finally, he took David's wallet and car keys and tossed them in one direction before running away in the other, jumping over a fence that separated the apartment complex from a small neighborhood. David and I stood in silence for a second, trying to comprehend what had just happened. We slowly collected his keys and wallets and then went inside and called the police, definitely in shock. But this is where the story gets really interesting. Police officers patrolled the other side of the residential complex. It was a group of about 26 buildings. We were at 26 and the policeman was around 1. And the police were there because they got a call the day before about that same guy robbing someone. The police and detectives came and took our story and asked us questions for about an hour. When they came out, it was still relatively early, maybe 9 o'clock in the evening. We were still in shock, but David and I decided we'd still go to the flashy Christmas party we'd planned to go to, thinking it would help take our mind off the awful encounter. A friend of ours was holding a pre-game match in his apartment in Building 3 of the same complex. Even though we decided not to drink that night, we headed there in our tacky sweaters. It got a bit noisy before the game, and we heard a loud knock on the door. We open it and see a person who lives next door to our friends. He said, "Hey guys, you can shut up. I don't want anyone to get into trouble. The police and an investigator are in my apartment right now because I was robbed here last night. I heard 2 people got robbed tonight, so please be safe, okay?" And David and I looked at each other, then back at him. "Oh, hello. Actually, it was us. 2 of us were robbed tonight. Nice to meet you, fellow victim." He laughed and shook our hands. The neighbor and David compared the knives they now carried as personal defense weapons before we returned to him. Later on the road, David and I parted ways, but the complex's security was beefed up. More lighting was installed in the parking lot, and the girl and I moved in. We had to park in the very places where I was held at gunpoint. Maybe it's a stupid way to face your fears, but luckily we didn't have any problems while we lived there. But in the end, apparently, this guy who robbed us was never caught. I am a 21-year-old male. It was July 4th, 2019, and I live in Kansas in the USA. At the time, I was working the night shift in a maximum security prison. The cell I ran was the maximum total population, 1 per cell. And this is where all the bad guys were kept. And in general, the worst members of society were housed here. Before work, I did a typical American 4th of July holiday. Grilling, setting off fireworks, drinking a beer or two, having a great time with my now wife and family. My wife kept telling me that I should just call in sick and take the day without pay. I said no because, well, we're a little behind on the math. But boy, I really wish I was listening to her now. The night passed, and the time came when we left my mother, and I went home and went to work. I took my wife home and dropped her off, packed up and went to work. My wife's car was actually broken down, so she was stuck at home for the night. As I was driving to work, which was about an hour away, I watched fireworks going off everywhere. It was also kind of sad, because I've never had to work on 4th before. It was the first time, but after I got to work and got all my equipment, I got into my cell. As usual, the prisoners were washed and locked up. I took my night cleaning crew out so they could clean up the rest of the cell, and met my partner for the night in the officers' quarters for our last shift briefing. Fast forward an hour of our shift. It is now around 12:30. Another officer entered the cell, so there are now 3 of us. This happened a lot during the night shift, as there was nothing to do but make rounds every half hour or so. When out of nowhere we hear the prisoner laughing like a witch, like cackling. It was weird, but no big deal. Drugs were a big problem in this institution. As far as I know, it doesn't matter. But eventually, after a few more rants, I decided to go and see what was making the sound, in case they were high-pitched or something. I went through and checked all 200 inmates and nothing. There were a few little ones that weren't even asleep, so I just brushed it off and went back to my office. My partner and the other officer were asking if anyone needed a cell search. I couldn't think of anyone in particular that I suspected had anything. So I went and checked all the cameras again to see if I could get smoke or see anything. As I walked through the second-floor cell, I found a prisoner behaving very strangely. He was lying in bed facing the wall and just talking. This was also common as there are many inmates with minor mental health issues. I figured he must have been high because he turned and looked at me and told me to go. I was going to leave him alone, but the disrespect made me change my mind, and the time is now 12:40 p.m. on the 5th of July. I go back to the office and tell the other 2 officers what cell he was in, and I wanted him searched, cell 218. So, the way the camera is placed, it has 100 cameras per level, but from the officer's post you can see the north side, the first floor and the second floor, but you can't see the south side unless you walk 50 feet it. Imagine the cell house from the Shawshank Redemption, except instead of looking through and seeing cells across, you just see a wall. The cells are literally back to back. So when the officers went to drag him out of the cell to be searched, I went up to the first floor and watched from below. The reason why? I wanted the prisoner to be on the first floor, not the second. There was only a handrail to protect against going over the edge. I noticed that the prisoner took forever to get out of his cell. He came out in shorts and clothes, which is strange because he wasn't fully dressed. He didn't even wear sandals, just shorts and clothes. But it took him 5 minutes to come out. And it made me very nervous. The prisoner was also a 6-foot-tall, 250-pound muscular fellow who was certainly no different from us. So from the ground, I yell at him and tell him to get down to the ground so he can make a phone call or check his email or commission or something. And he refused my offer, which never happens. At that moment, I knew something was up. He watched them search his camera from the remote, and it was alarming. They were in his cell, and I was on the ground. He could easily ambush them, and he would reach them before I could climb the stairs. So to try to keep them safe, I went upstairs to the prisoner. He was standing in the corner by the handrail at the top of the stairs. He knew I was the OIC officer in charge of that cell, and he knew it was me who saw him talking to himself, and he asked me why I searched his cell. I lied and I said, "Oh, it's nothing personal, man. I have a quota to fill for overnight cam searches and you weren't asleep, so I just picked you to search. It will take a second. Don't worry." He was not himself. He walked. Something was wrong, and then I saw it. He turned just to the right, and I saw the Samsung logo on his do-rag, reflecting the light of the camera. Shit. I knew immediately that there would be problems because he had a cell phone. I radioed for 2 more officers to come to me. The prisoner did not seem to notice that I was calling. My supervisors replied that 2 of them were on their way. It should also be noted that at this time only isolation officers had protective vests. By some miracle, everything went well, and they arrived on time. But I have thought about it for a long time since then.